Well, go ahead, please.
Arizona Food Bank Network. And we are a network of the 5 large food banks and the 1,000 locations, which many of are church-based. About 65% of our network is based in churches. And we are a charitable food relief system, but we are also an anti-hunger organization that speaks out about the importance of good nutrition policy. And we work most directly with schools to make sure that kids are fed at schools, which is probably the #1 place outside of the home that kids get access to nutrition. So those are kind of the 3 pillars of our work. And as Dr. Cumming mentioned, much of that is charitable. About nearly 50 to 60% of the funds that we receive are from individual donors, from foundations, from corporations, and some support for logistics and the movement and distribution of food comes from the state and federal government. So that is who we are. And I have a few slides. Hopefully I can make this work. And I apologize again, the humanity of us all working from our homes and living in the space that we do, where we work, means that you get to hear my dogs every once in a while. So I apologize for the noise in the background every once in a while. When I was on a call recently with a senator, the dog started barking and she was very gracious. So I hope you will extend the same graciousness to me. But I do appreciate that we all have a little bit more humanity, I think, in our lives, in our workplaces. So again, this is who we are. I love these wonderful pictures that we've added. Recently, we launched a new website, and we're trying to, again, do what we talked a little bit about earlier, is tell more stories, talk to more people, show the faces of folks impacted by hunger so that people understand what hunger in America and specifically in Arizona looks more like, rather than, I think, for many of us that grew up with the video of world hunger replaying in our minds. That's a very different picture of hunger than what hunger looks like in America right now. Certainly it's not a lack of food. We have plenty of food in our country. We tend to have enough to go around, although I acknowledge there are at times periods of scarcity for certain types of food. For the most part, there is plenty of food available for everyone. To start again with a few statistics, I know Dr. Cumming mentioned that we were making some good progress. We were being able to address hunger, but hunger in Arizona has always been a big problem. We normally serve about 450,000 people across our network. That's pretty significant. That is a duplicated count. Some folks come to us 2 and 3 times a month. Others come once a month to get a food box, federal commodities box, and some people come once a year. So we just never know. The purpose of our emergency food network is to be there when people need that, and so that's a large part of what we do. As you can see, a lot more folks at risk of hunger. This may mean they may have had an episode or a period where they were between jobs, where they needed some additional support. So the number of individuals that could be touched by hunger in any given year is significantly more. The next two statistics I think are most telling is the direction that we're headed, and this concerns me a great deal. A 28% increase estimated by Feeding America in increase in hunger, 37% more for children. When you think about some of our rural communities, Apache County, Yuma County, I know we talked about rural areas earlier. This is very concerning. Apache County already approaches 40% when you think about rural childhood food insecurity. If you added, an additional 30%, 37% on top of that, you'd be looking at 3 and 4 children impacted by hunger in that community. And what does that mean? Does it mean that we're not getting food up to Apache County? Absolutely not. We truck food up there every day. But what it means is that more and more children will be left without access to school meals. They'll be left without access to grocery stores. Obviously, parents will be left without resources to be able to purchase food in those grocery stores. And so you could start to see not just the malnutrition that we see on the Navajo Nation right now, but you could start to see more of the the worrisome behaviors, the children going out and committing crimes due to needing to meet their basic needs, or parents resulting obviously to moving outside of their communities, reliance on family more and friends, obviously over reliance on charity, which taps the charitable food relief system. It's definitely going to be a concern in the weeks and months ahead. And I know we're all thinking about what the next steps are for this presidency and the new administration. But as you can imagine, hunger is at the top of my asks when I speak with Mr. Kelly and potentially the White House on this issue. And our hope is that they will focus their attention and the new administration on this issue. I love the Bread for the World statistic. Again, charity alone is not going to solve hunger. It's really important to think about the role that charity plays in addressing hunger, that federal nutrition programs like SNAP and WIC and school meals play in being able to meet the needs of people right now. Again, a statistic about SNAP, and then the recognition that the majority of people that are receiving SNAP benefits now and in the future are children and seniors and people without disabilities. It's not the rhetoric that you sometimes hear about if folks just got a job or got a better job, or that somehow that they wouldn't be in the circumstances they are. That's absolutely not true, and you can see that by this statistic. Real quickly, just because this answers a lot of questions for people, many times I get the question about where does food come from food banks? How are you able to address the needs of, right now, nearly 1 million people? And this gives you that breakdown. So it's just a quick bit of statistics about where food comes from in our food bank network. This is indicative only of Arizona, but I think it is also indicative across the country of what we're looking at right now. A lot of acronyms, obviously, in the federal government. They love acronyms. That last one, the CSFP, is a food box for seniors. We also right now have the CFAP, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. And I'll acknowledge the role that the federal government is playing in feeding people right now. It goes back to an earlier question about, are we doing enough, or could we be doing more than just charity? Absolutely. Government is good in disaster. They went ahead and bought up a lot of commodities and food that was unable to be sold to China and other foreign governments. The result was being able to feed it to people who need it right now, and there are a large number of those. Is that the perfect supply chain? Absolutely not. Is that the way it should have worked? Absolutely not. But it is addressing an immediate need right now in a disaster response way. So I think that we have to acknowledge there is good and bad to the feeding programs that we have right now. So this gives you a good sense, again, about where food comes from in food banks. Again, these more statistics, what we're doing right now. If someone asked how much time are you spending on feeding people, more than I'd like, because the demand is so high, but at the same time, it is incredibly rewarding to see the resiliency and the responsiveness of our network. We have served 80% more than of the people that we served last year, and have distributed more and more food boxes. It's an unfortunate demand, but one that I have been amazed to see food bank CEOs and their staff be able to meet. I have only heard of 1 or 2 occasions where people have shown up and not been able to have access to food. And that may have been because of a third-party distributor. It may have been just because we had some unanticipated demand. Certainly we have run out of certain types of food, as we usually do, but for the most part, we have been able to meet the needs of our communities right now. And for that, I think we should be proud of that fact.
Great.
We talked a little bit about SNAP, but as the largest nutrition program in the country, I think we should acknowledge the role that it is playing in feeding people right now. Almost 1 million people, nearly 20% more than it was last year, are applying and participating in SNAP. It's providing about $168 right now, a little bit more. Usually SNAP is enough for meals for you to buy about $4 worth of meals a day, which seems pretty amazing that people are able to feed themselves on that low amount. Right now it's a little bit higher, and that has been related to the investment that we made in the CARES Act, that the federal government made in the CARES Act in the spring, and our hope for an additional stimulus package, a fourth stimulus package moving ahead, because we know that it is going to be critical to keep benefits at a level in which not only people can feed their families, but as Dr. Cummings mentioned, that they can invest in their communities. I mean, the $160 doesn't sit in anyone's pocket. It gets invested in a grocery store and in a convenience store, and it pays the salaries of the folks that work there. Those folks go out and spend money in their local communities, and much of that is obviously invested in rural communities where economic activity is a challenge, obviously, right now. I'll also acknowledge they've made improvements in the SNAP program during the coronavirus. Folks can now order groceries. Grocery stores have been able to waive fees or otherwise provide some support for delivery options, and we're hoping to see more of that. So it has presented an opportunity for us to be able to meet the needs of folks during a disaster that I hope continues beyond the pandemic. I'll let you read through these because I think they're incredibly powerful, but I think the number one thing that I look forward to is, again, the work of our staff and of our food banks in talking to the people that visit food banks, that understanding the circumstances that bring them to our doors, being able to help in more ways than just feeding them. Obviously, churches play a tremendous role in feeding their souls, but we also work with partners who address dental needs and medical health needs. And I think that's also important. So I'm always amazed at the reasons why people come to food banks, but I'm also very humbled by the fact that they trust food banks and our network to be able not just to meet those needs, but to do so with pride, right? That coming to a food bank shouldn't be a source of embarrassment. We're there to help. We're there to be able to understand those circumstances, hopefully provide referrals and be able to be a sounding board for the struggles. And there are many. We did a survey in June of our large food banks and asked them if they could estimate how many people they believe in their food bank lines are there for the very first time. And they came back with a pretty astounding percentage of 55%. So we're seeing a tremendous number of people who have never visited a food bank before. And hopefully that comes also with a greater understanding for the community about how big this pandemic is, how many lives it has touched, and what we are going to need to do in the future to make sure that more of our hungry neighbors don't rely on what I consider the secondary food supply chain to be able to meet their nutrition needs. I know we're not going to talk a ton about the election, but I do have to acknowledge that not much has changed when you think about our state legislature. So that's where I'll start. You can see the numbers there. The Democrats picked up an additional seat in the Senate as it stands right now. Though again, as folks are watching their additional screens, I'm sure they're seeing that Legislative District 28 is down to 538 districts. So, or 538 votes. So, as you can imagine, this could get closer. That we could be, or sorry, it could get further apart. It could be 17-13, but it is likely to stay very similar to this. Much of our work done at the state legislature is to address not just the needs of food banks, but the needs of hungry people. We've worked for advocacy on SNAP policy. We've worked for advocacy on WIC policy and for school meals. One big, bold move that I'm hoping that we'll take this year is to start conversations with legislators about universal feeding, that it should become a function of our schools to, if our children are attending schools for 6 or 7 hours a day, that schools have an obligation to feed them while they're there, particularly when you think about 2/3 of those children already relying on a free and reduced lunch program to make sure that they meet their nutritional needs. So that is one piece of legislation I think we'll be looking at for the winter. And I acknowledge that the makeup of our legislature isn't always an indication of how they'll respond to hunger, but always having a a bipartisan agreement, which is easier to reach when you have a very close split between Republicans and Democrats, is important. I have been in policy for many years, and I can remember times when the Republicans dominated both House and Senate in our state legislature, and it was incredibly difficult to even have conversations about poverty and the impact to communities around us. So I always feel like a richer discussion occurs when that balance of power is closer. In Congress, again, we did have a little bit of change. We now have 5 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 1 still pending race that is closer, although I think as the votes continue to be counted, that will be a deciding moment probably today or tomorrow. In the Senate, I believe that Senator Kelly has announced victory, and so now Senator Sinema and Senator Kelly will be our senators for the next 2 years. In fact, Senator Kelly taking office probably within the next 2 weeks. As you recall, that is a special election that will result him in taking office immediately. Again, we share data, we share information, but most importantly, we share stories. And I really hope that that is the place where you can help, is being able to talk about not just what goes on in your church and the folks that you talk to when you sit in the pews, but more importantly, the fellowship and the ministry and mission work that you do when you go out to the communities. And so I urge you not to go to the communities that you're used to going to. I urge you not to go to the neighbor next door. I urge you to go to the neighbor in a community that does not look like you, that does not act like you, that does not think like you, and that does not speak like you, to be able to understand the circumstances under which they try and feed their families, and the circumstances under which they view the world, because I think we are a much richer community when we can walk in the shoes of others. So that is a good place to start, and that is going to be the work of the Arizona Food Bank Network over the next course of the year. Real briefly, this just gives administrative advocacy. Advocacy takes many forms, as Dr. Cummins mentioned, and administrative advocacy is the very unsexy way of doing policy, but a very important way. This is rulemaking. This is phone conversations and draft policies that say, this is the way we are going to implement the laws. Laws often can be ambiguous or otherwise open to interpretation. This is why we have lawyers. But there is an opportunity, I think, for advocacy there, is that you're able to go in and say, hey, we know that you had intended to, for example, not require, to allow individuals who had a previous drug felony conviction to be eligible for SNAP. How are you going to do that? Are you going to talk to the courts? Are you going to work with probation officers? How are you going to understand when that sentence has been fulfilled and otherwise their obligations have been met and that they are eligible for the program? And you know, as much as we can, we wanted to express our opinion on that, which was to say that folks have served their sentence, and we believe that they should be given a fresh start, and access to nutrition should be a part of that. So this is a couple other ways where advocacy can be met, and you often, if you're part of our advocacy network, will see us asking you to comment on rulemaking or otherwise send a letter or postcard to individuals in the administrations. Again, going back to how you can help, what you can do, raise awareness. Many of you may not be on social media. You may not be sharing that. I tweeted out something that Dr. Cummings said this morning about the hunger not being an issue of calories, but an issue of justice. And I absolutely believe he is correct. I encourage you to repeat things that you hear, that you agree with, as much as possible, especially when it's an anti-hunger message. If I see it, we'll pick it up, we'll spread the good word, and I think that's a great way to get facts out into the community, as well as the stories of folks that we know. It's a little hard to refute, even to a policymaker, when you say, I have a friend that. In fact, I've had legislators repeat my own stories, and I've also had them repeat their stories of opposition back to me. So we are a community of storytellers, and we want to overwhelm that community with stories about neighbors who might not be in the best of circumstances right now, and neighbors for which we know we can help. And so if you yourself find yourself in that community, I urge you to reach out to us so that we can help tell that story. But I also urge you to, if you're fortunate enough not to be in a position of hunger, that you share the stories of your communities and your neighbors. Again, we're looking for a fourth stimulus package. We know that evictions are going to be on the rise very soon. We're very concerned about what that's going to mean, not just for homeless individuals, but then their access to nutrition, certainly what that's going to mean on the charitable food system, and the additional need for SNAP benefits, for school meals, for WIC programs, and for the general supply chain. Again, making sure that we have enough food to be able to meet the need. You will have access to this presentation. I'm sure that's going to be a question at some point. You can sign up for our advocacy calls. We meet every other Friday at noon to talk generally about farming and food issues. And if there's ever a topic that you want us to learn more about, we often have guest speakers, and we'd be happy to have any of you join us at any time. I know that you've already talked a little bit about the Request to Speak system. The biggest questions I'm getting right now from other advocates and other communities is, how is it going to work? Is the legislature going to operate virtually? And the short answer is, we don't know. We have not yet made decisions. Legislators will start meeting next week to elect their leadership in the House and the Senate here in our State House. And then they will start making the rules about in-person testimony, virtual testimony. I have participated during the off session in a couple of legislative meetings. All of that has been done virtually with the opportunity to speak. Of course, that does present some challenges, and the questions that we're working through are questions like, who gets limited access then if you move to a virtual environment? And folks that don't have unlimited cell phone minutes or access to Wi-Fi are those types of folks. So I urge you in your communities to be those access points for individuals, allowing folks who want to participate in our legislative process and in our advocacy work to borrow your cell phones or use your computers or provide a hotspot for individuals who might need access to Wi-Fi. So that is going to be critically important, and we're still thinking of ways, through ways where we can ensure that we have a legislature that hears from its constituents constantly. So that is what I have to share with all of you, and I always enjoy the question and answer period much more than I enjoy the presentation. So I look forward to the discussion part of this conversation.